Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Farah Shaira binti Samsul, and in this video, my groupmates and I are going to present our findings on Liv's distinctive style when it comes to poetry writing. Our findings are going to be centered on two major elements, which are deviation and parallelism. But before we get into that, let us look at Liv's biography first. Leav is a poet and a novelist born in a refugee camp situated in Thailand during the Cambodian genocide. After that, her family migrated to a town called Cabramatta in Sydney, Australia. It is also said that Leav has an interest towards literature ever since she was young. Back then, she would write poems in her journal and share the journal with her friends. Leav also attended the College of Fine Arts in Sydney, where her thesis, Cosplaying Lolita, received the Churchill Fellowship Award. Leav made her debut in 2013 with her self-publishing book entitled Love and Adventure. Initially, this book is published online, but the book was then published physically after receiving a call from a book publishing company due to the book's popularity. It is to Liv's surprise that Love and Adventure was then announced as one of the best-selling books on Amazon. In 2014, Leav continued her writing on love and loss in her book entitled Lullabies. Just like her first poem collection, this book also received the same positive reaction from the public and even earned the title Goodreads Best Poetry. After that, Leav made her debut as a novelist in 2016 with her novel entitled Sad Girls. The novel also touches on the matter of love and has ranked #1 on Straits Times and other sellers chart internationally. Other than that, Leav had also published several poetry books such as Memories in 2015, The Universe of Us in 2016, and Sea of Strangers in 2018. Just like her previous work, these books also became bestsellers on Amazon.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Hurin and I'll be presenting on Liv's distinctive style of using phonological parallelism in her poems. Phonological parallelism is a technique used in literature whereby there will be repetition of the same or similar sounds. As for Liv's poetry, she incorporated phonological parallelism to give an effect of euphony into her poems. This will help maintain or increase the musicality in Liv's poems, which also will increase the memorability among her readers. Most importantly, she incorporated the use of phonological parallelism because she wanted to establish meaning through the manipulation of sounds, which will be demonstrated further in the poems chosen. In the first example, in her poem Golden Cage, it talks about the persona's suffering from a lost love. Therefore, she remains in a metaphorical cage called the Golden Cage. So in this poem, Leav wanted to convey the meanings of the poem by using alliteration, by repeating the h and k sounds. As for the h sound, like in the first stanza, a bird who hurt her wing now forgotten how to fly. So the h sound is a voiceless sound and it sounds weak. Therefore, Leav wanted to signify the persona's weakened state after being in the cage for a very long time. As for the repetition of the k sound, like in the third stanza, a breath she caught and kept that left her in a sigh. So the k sound is actually one of the hardest sound because it requires the complete stopping of breath coming from the mouth before releasing it suddenly. Therefore, Leav's use on the repetition of the k sound is to signify the persona's feeling of entrapment of being in the golden cage. Therefore, Leav's use of alliteration in the golden cage is her way to demonstrate the feelings of the persona of being weak and feeling trapped in that golden cage. So she expresses that by using the h sound in signifying the wicked state, and the k sound in order to give the sense of imagery of feeling trapped in that golden cage. Next, in the poem Well Wishes, it talks about the persona's longing feeling towards her beloved, whom they were already separated. So, meaning in this poem is established through the use of assonance, like the repetition of the oo sound, like in the second stanza, amidst the doom and the gloom and the hospital rooms, and also the a sound, like earthquakes will reign between terrace and plains, and also the repetition of the E sound. When the strangers we meet take us down one-way streets. And these sounds are all long vowels. Therefore, the repetition of these vowels were used to emphasize the persona's longing feelings towards her beloved and to also emphasize the distance of their separation. Moving on to the next poem, Entwined. This poem talks about the breaking off of the relationship of the beloved and the persona. So, in order for Leav to signify the breaking off of the relationship, she used the alliteration of the k sound in the last stanza. If you were kind, you'd cut the tether, but I must ask you to be cruel. So, in this stanza, the repetition of the k sound gives an effect of cutting off of something, which then signifies the whole importance of the poem, which is to break off the relationship. So in the last poem, written in traffic, it talks about the persona railing on the feelings of love. So in order for Leav to emphasize the imagery of the traffic, she used alliteration on the s sound. A quiet gladness in the busy sadness, inside the final tussle of love and its madness, its goodness and badness, its hustle and bustle. So, judging from the title of the poem itself, written in traffic, and as we all know, the word traffic gives the imagery of having many people, which is also very noisy. So, Leav repeated the s sound so that she can emphasize the plurality of the traffic imagery in this poem. Therefore, in conclusion, Leav incorporated her use of phonological parallelism in her poems, not only to give a musical effect, but most importantly to demonstrate points of significance in her poems through the use of sounds.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Iza Atira binti Hairi. So, as known, parallelism is considered as a great persuasive tool. Its repetitive quality makes the sentence or sentences symmetrical and therefore very memorable for the reader. Parallelism makes the ideas easier for readers to process because they sense a pattern and know what to expect. The first occurrence of parallelism that is observed from Leav's poem is graphological parallelism, and it is observed from all four poems of Leav. It shows a high tendency in the arrangement of the poem into stanzas. From the poems, the number of stanzas and even lines vary from each other, but within the poem themselves, poem like Well Wishes may be seen as a tercet, where the others like Golden in Cage a couplet and Entwined a quatrain. This seems to suggest that there is an order to the poem. These poems also show the same kind of structure all towards the end except the one of writing in traffic. The poem contains two stanzas, with one that is a quatrain and the other is a couplet. Besides, there is also the fact that all four poems have a parallel structure symmetry to the stanza. All the following stanza follows the first form of the first stanza with a hanging indent, making the end of the stanza looks like a descending staircase. Nonetheless, in poetry, when the stanzaic structure is repeated, when lines or couplets are put in a parallel way, that illustrates the graphological parallelism. And in the case of Leav's, it becomes an aid to visual perception, symmetry, and visual equivalence of letters, symbols, and blocks of composition. And therefore, it makes a point to readers that the ideas expressed through the so considered parallel graphs are of equal values, meaning that they all contribute to the same width of importance for the meaning projection of the poem itself. So, Another kind of parallelism that is observed to be inherent with the Langley's writing style is semantic parallelism. In the writing in traffic, for instance, the unexpected feeling that comes with being in love has been pulled to the fore so readers can imagine it. The starting state was gladness, which basically means a state of happiness, then sadness, which is the opposite of happiness, then madness, where it means one is in a crazy mental state or is going through a rough time in life. And the closing was goodness and badness, which also means pros and cons, yin and yang, the black and white, and so on and so forth. So, whenever an item arrives, the degree of the state also rises. The reader, if they do not notice that, can actually relatively aspect the relational meanings, and that is what links the state of being in love as a foreimage is the capacity of one to feel all types of emotions building and mixing into their head and heart at the same time. And sometimes it can even drive someone to madness, in which this become the foreimage of being in love, or to acknowledge that being in love does have its pros and cons, like it's not a bed of roses, and at times it can be tested, and therefore it becomes as the background images. So there is also several instances of synonyms in Langley. For example, in Golden Cage, the verbs heard, sing, kept, and caught summarizes that the bird is thoroughly heard as it is being said in the beginning of the poem, where her wing may have suffered some damage. However, towards the end, the last stanza does not depict the possibility that the author is actually talking about a bird which is in love and is trapped in a cage, because it is absurd, but rather the author is actually building an image of a person who is in love, and therefore these verbs are being used to represent what the person, this she person, is feeling, and it is being trapped and unable to break away from the relationship because she still holds on to the love that she feels. And this is basically being comprised by the whole scenario, which is all in the moment that depicts an image of a bird who is hurt in a cage and doesn't have the means or the will to fly away. Therefore, whatever thoughts that come to the reader's minds is interestingly being put in a systematic semantic parallelism, where in this case is the instance of a synonym. So I guess that is all for my part. Thank you.
I am Noraida binti Abusama, and I'll be presenting about this semantic deviation found in these poems written by Leav. So basically, semantic deviation is the unconventional combinations of word phrase that can transmit the author's mind and feeling in the poems to the readers to represent the author's life, opinion, attitude, surrounding experience, and might be cultural background as well. So if we look in the poems, there are significant numbers of semantic deviations found, ranging from irony, paradox, oxymoron, and metaphor. These are the example of irony that can be found in 3 out of 4 poems written by Leav. We can see that the author might be used irony as a literary device, as she want to highlight the mood and the theme of the poem by adding some underlying meanings that related to the poems. To could be she want to convey her state of mind and her inner desires, and that being conveyed through the poems. Okay, moving on to paradox. The use of paradox in these poems might be because of the author want to generate the feeling of intrigue in the reader's minds, as well as to cause them have a deeper level of focus in order for them to understand the content and meaning of the poems, as the paradoxical wording may reveal some element of truth within untrue statement. Next, we can see here in the poems that the author also used the oxymoron as the literary device. Might be first because of she wants the reader to create a vivid and memorable image in order to understand her poems, and then next might be because she wants to create a long-lasting resonance and immediate evocative sensibility in order for the reader to get the sense and the feeling of the poem. And lastly, the author also used metaphor in her poem, might be because she wants to express the complexity of insight and feeling that is related to love and relationship as the main theme of the poem, as well as conveying other underlying meaning in the poem. To sum up, based on these poems, the various semantic deviations found shows the author's creativities and the aesthetical values of the poem itself. Even though we can see here that all the poems are written in a very simple vocabularies and very direct, but it still does a complex and meaningful underlying messages and meaning based on the use of the semantic deviations. That's all. Thank you. We shall now move on to our next finding, that is the use of graphological deviation. From our analysis, it is found that Langleaf is fond of dashes. She would incorporate dashes at the end of a line, which thus creates a pause that gives the subsequent or the following line an emphasis. Not only that, the dashes also create like a frame to the following line, which accentuates that particular line in the poem. Langleaf's use of dashes also make her poems informal. As a result, her poem feels intimate, conversational, and engaging to its readers. It is possible that Langleaf opted for a conversational style of writing or informal style of writing since she initially published her book online, precisely on Instagram. Instagram is a site where people are inclined to read something less formal. Hence, her strategy of writing in an informal language will boost uh, the reader's interest in reading her poem. Alright, that is all from our group for Langleaf's distinctive style in poetry writing. Thank you.